Across the world, there are places that seem to defy explanation. Temples appear thousands of years earlier than history says they should. Stones weigh more than modern cranes can lift. Maps depict land supposedly undiscovered. And texts survive in scripts no one can read. Who created these things? What knowledge did they possess? And why did that knowledge disappear? Tonight, we explore some of the most baffling mysteries ever uncovered. Settle in, let the stories unfold, and share your thoughts along the way. Which theory feels closest to the truth to you? Or what explanation do you think we're still missing? Buried for millennia beneath the soil of southeastern Turkey lies a site that, by conventional expectations, should not exist at all. Göbekli Tepe predates Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids by thousands of years. Yet its massive carved pillars and intricate reliefs display a level of sophistication long thought impossible for hunter-gatherers living over 12,000 years ago. Built around 9,600 BCE. Before agriculture, cities, or metallurgy, the site stands as a direct challenge to traditional timelines of civilization. It is a monumental sanctuary in a world where none was supposed to be. The setting is a series of rolling limestone hills near the Syrian border. In the 1960s, a surface survey noted work stone protruding from a mound, but it was not until the 1990s that archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began systematic excavations. What emerged stunned the archaeological world. Beneath the hill lay enormous circular enclosures, each formed by T-shaped limestone pillars rising up to 5.5 meters high and weighing as much as 15 to 20 tons. At the center of many circles stood two towering monoliths, facing one another like silent sentinels. Even more astonishing were the carvings. Foxes, lions, snakes, vultures, boars, scorpion, and abstract symbols appear in high relief, executed with precision and confidence. The craftsmanship is deliberate, the planning unmistakable. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe understood stone form and symbolism at a level that contradicts the long-held image of small, loosely organized nomadic bands, struggling merely to survive. There are no houses, no hearths, no evidence of permanent habitation or nearby water sources. Göbekli Tepe does not appear to be a village. It seems to have been purely ceremonial. Schmidt proposed that it function as a ritual center or pilgrimage site where scattered groups gather for feasting and share belief. If so, the cooperation required to quarry, carve, and erect these massive stones may have driven social complexity rather than resulted from it. In this view, organized religion may have preceded agriculture, and temples may have come before towns. It is a radical idea, yet the site itself makes it difficult to dismiss. Some of the enclosures appear to align with celestial features, hinting at astronomical awareness or cosmological symbolism, though these interpretations remain debated. Then there is the most puzzling detail of all. Around 8,000 BCE, the people who used Göbekli Tepe deliberately buried it. The stone circles were carefully backfilled, sealed beneath layers of earth, as if preserved or intentionally hidden. Why would society entomb its greatest creation? Was the site ritually closed, rendered too sacred to leave exposed, or abandoned in response to profound cultural change? Mainstream archaeology attributes the site to indigenous hunter-gatherers whose shared belief enabled extraordinary feats. Others look further, pointing to the dramatic climate upheaval of the Younger Dryas, a period of abrupt cooling beginning around 12,800 years ago. Some speculate that Göbekli Tepe could be a legacy of an advanced Ice Age culture disrupted by catastrophe, preserved as a testament by survivors. This idea, tied to the controversial Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, remains speculative, with little direct evidence beyond the monument itself. After decades of excavation, Göbekli Tepe still guards its secrets. Each newly uncovered pillar forces a reconsideration of humanity's earliest chapters. It reminds us that 12,000 years ago, people came together to build something enduring, symbolic, and transcendent. How many other chapters of early human history remain buried beneath our feet? Göbekli Tepe is not alone. Across the globe, other structures pose equally unsettling questions. Some are so massive that even modern engineering struggles to explain them. One of the most striking lies in the mountains of Lebanon. High in the Bekaa Valley stand the ruins of Baalbek, known in Roman times as Heliopolis. At first glance, the site impresses with its grand classical temples dedicated to Jupiter and Bacchus. But beneath those Roman structures lies a foundation that defies comprehension. Embedded in the platform wall are three colossal stone blocks, each weighing between 750 and 800 tons. Known as a trilithon, they are among the largest stones ever moved by human hands. Nearby, in the ancient quarry, lie even larger monoliths. One, called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighs around 1,000 tons. Another, only recently fully measured, is estimated to weigh as much as 1,600 tons. These are stones equivalent to hundreds of elephants carved from bedrock and partially moved before being abandoned. How were they cut, transported, and positioned? The prevailing view attributes the platform to Roman builders of the 1st century BCE, masters of engineering who left aqueducts and amphitheaters across their empire. Yet nowhere else did the Romans attempt to move stones of this scale. No modern crane could lift an 800-ton block. The Romans may have exploited the quarry's slight elevation above the temple site, dragging stones on earthen ramps using rollers, ropes, and massive labor forces, but no definitive explanation exists. This uncertainty has opened the door to alternate interpretations. Some suggest the Romans inherited the platform from an earlier culture, possibly Bronze Age or even older. Local legends speak of giants or biblical figures, while others propose Phoenician origins. Firm evidence for a pre-Roman foundation remains elusive, yet the sheer scale of the stones continues to provoke doubt. Why would Roman builders choose such impractical blocks when smaller ones would have sufficed? Speculation ranges from ingenious mechanical systems now lost to history to more exotic ideas involving unknown technologies. Ancient astronaut theories, though unsupported by evidence, persist largely because Baalbek feels so far beyond expectation. What remains undeniable is that no ancient text describes how these stones were moved. The builders left no instructions, only results. At the southwest corner of the temple podium, the trilithon stones sit perfectly aligned, elevated several meters above ground, supporting a platform that has endured for 2,000 years. In the quarry, the unfinished giants remain where they were cut, as if the project reached a limit even its creators could not overcome. Standing at Baalbek today confronts us with a simple truth. People in the distant past solved problems we still struggle to explain. Whether through brute force, lost methods, or ingenuity we no longer recognize, the megaliths of Baalbek remain a silent challenge to our understanding of ancient capability. Mystery does not always come in stone. Sometimes it arrives on parchment. In 1929, researchers examining archives in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace uncovered an old map drawn in 1513 by Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis. At first glance, it appeared typical of Renaissance cartography, depicting Europe, North Africa, and the Americas. But along its southern edge lay something deeply unsettling, a landmass resembling Antarctica, shown centuries before its official discovery in 1820. Even more puzzling, this land appeared ice-free, with coastlines and contours that seemed to match modern surveys beneath Antarctic ice. How could a 16th century map depict such detail? Piri Reis himself wrote that he compiled the chart from older sources, including maps dating back to the time of Alexander the Great and charts attributed to Columbus. His map is a patchwork, a geographical palimpsest combining ancient and contemporary knowledge. This may explain distortions elsewhere on the map, but the southern continent remains controversial. If it is Antarctica, it implies that someone mapped its coast before it was buried under ice, possibly more than 6,000 years ago. Critics argue the landmass may simply be a distorted South America, while others insist a resemblance is too strong to dismiss. No consensus exists. What remains is a document that hints at lost knowledge, inherited fragments of a world map passed down through civilizations whose full stories are gone. Taken together, these mysteries do not prove a single lost civilization or forgotten technology, but they do suggest that human history is far more complex than neat timelines allow. Across continents and millennia, people built, observed, recorded, and imagined in ways that still challenge us. The past may not be rewritten, but it is far from fully read. If the southern land on the Piri Reis map really were Antarctica drawn ice-free, it would shake conventional history to its foundations. It would imply that some long-lost seafaring culture charted parts of the globe far earlier than we allow for, an idea that captured the imagination of writers like Charles Hapgood in the 1960s. Hapgood argued that the Piri-Reis map might preserve echoes of a much older cartographic tradition, fragments of ancient world maps that survived through copying, migration, and catastrophe, perhaps passing through libraries such as Alexandria before reappearing in Renaissance hands. It's an intoxicating scenario, a scattered inheritance of forgotten charts, resurfacing centuries later in the margins of an Ottoman admiral's parchment, like a ghost of an earlier age. But skeptics urge restraint. Many historians and cartography specialists argue that the Antarctica claim rests on misinterpretation. They suggest the southern landmass is more likely the distorted southern tip of South America, drawn too large, stretched by projection errors, or blended with the Renaissance-era belief in a hypothetical southern continent. Terra Australis, often included on maps based more on theory and rumor than observation. 16th century map makers lacked modern projection methods, and their coastlines could warp dramatically as they tried to fit incomplete data onto parchment. The Piri-Reis map itself contains obvious distortions in parts of the Caribbean and the Americas, so a skewed Patagonia or an imagined continuation of land is not only possible, but consistent with how maps of that era were produced. Piri-Reis wrote that he compiled his chart from multiple sources, older maps and more recent coastal charts, including information linked to Columbus and Iberian voyages. If one of his source charts came from a Spanish ship that had visited the New Indies, it may have incorporated Portuguese exploration data or even indigenous geographic knowledge, which could help explain why some details on the map, such as the placement of major rivers and the general run of the South American coast, seem surprisingly competent for 1513. That doesn't require a lost global civilization. It requires something simpler and more historically plausible, a patchwork of sources, some accurate, some speculative, stitched together into one ambitious document. Still, the mystery persists because the map is real, tangible, and provocative. It can be viewed today in Istanbul, and it continues to invite the same unanswered question. Did Piri-Reis unknowingly preserve a faint remnant of knowledge older than his own world, or are later generations simply reading too much into the distortions of early cartography? After decades of debate, no definitive resolution has silenced either side. The map endures as a reminder that history often survives in fragments, messy, partial, and vulnerable to the stories we want to tell about it. And maps aren't the only objects that ignite the imagination. Sometimes, mystery rises straight out of ground, sealed and silent until the moment it's opened. In July 2018, construction workers in Alexandria, Egypt, struck something solid a few meters beneath the city street. What they uncovered made headlines worldwide. A massive black granite sarcophagus, sealed shut and apparently untouched for more than 2,000 years. It was unmarked, no inscriptions, no decorative reliefs, just a dark, imposing coffin roughly 9 feet long, 5 feet wide, and 6 feet tall. Egyptian officials described it as the largest sealed sarcophagus found in Alexandria, and almost immediately, speculation took over. Could it be Alexander the Great? Could it be the tomb no one has ever found? And in the darker corners of public imagination, another fear surfaced. If it had remained sealed for so long, was it sealed for a reason? Despite superstition and online hysteria, archaeologists did what archaeologists do. They opened it. There was no treasure, no royal mummy, no gilded secrets. Instead, there was a foul stench and a scene as grim as it was unforgettable. The sarcophagus was nearly half filled with murky red-brown liquid, groundwater, and sewage that had seeped in over centuries, and floating within it were disarticulated skeletal remains of 3 individuals. The liquid's color, later linked to decomposition and contamination, only intensified the horror of the moment. So, no curse in the cinematic sense, unless one counts the smell, which witnesses described as brutal. Yet the discovery remains strange. 3 people in one sarcophagus is unusual, especially in a coffin of this scale. Early examination suggested 2 adult males and 1 adult female, likely aged somewhere between their 20s and 40s. One skull showed evidence of a wound consistent with an arrow or projectile injury, hinting that at least one individual may have died violently, possibly in conflict. But there were no names, no objects, no inscriptions, nothing to identify them or explain why they were entombed together. That absence pushed interpretation into uncertainty. Were they members of a family? Victims of an emergency burial after disease or upheaval? Soldiers, officers, or officials from the volatile centuries when Alexandria passed through different hands and regimes? Some suggested the sarcophagus may have been commissioned for someone of higher status and later reused, something not uncommon in antiquity, especially in a dense and long-lived city where space, politics, and wealth constantly reshaped burial practice. The sarcophagus was tentatively dated to the Ptolemaic or early Roman era, but even that broad placement doesn't solve the main question. Why this coffin and why these three? A bizarre modern footnote followed. An online petition gathered thousands of signatures demanding to drink the red liquid from the sarcophagus as if it were a supernatural elixir. Officials, unsurprisingly, did not indulge the internet's darkest sense of humor. The liquid was analyzed and disposed of. The bones were examined, but identities remained elusive. Any forensic or DNA results, if pursued, did not yield publicly definitive answers. In the end, the Alexandria sarcophagus did not reveal world-changing secrets, but it left behind a different kind of mystery, human, unresolved, and quietly unsettling. 3 lives, sealed beneath a city, preserved only in fragments, and discovered in a way that created more questions than it answered. It was a reminder that even in places as studied as Egypt, the ground still holds sealed rooms, buried stories, and silent names waiting to resurface. And sometimes a mystery isn't a monument or a tomb at all. Sometimes it's a book, so enormous, so uncanny, that legend clings to it like shadow. In the National Library of Sweden, behind climate control glass, rests one of the most extraordinary manuscripts ever produced. The Codex Gigas, the giant book, better known as the Devil's Bible. It is vast, roughly a meter tall, half a meter wide, and weighing around 75 kilograms. Its pages are made of vellum, hundreds of leaves believed to have required the skins of well over 100 animals. Inside is a strange and ambitious collection. The complete Latin Bible, historical chronicles, medical material, and even texts related to ritual and exorcism. But what makes the Codex infamous is a single full-page illustration, a vivid, unsettling portrait of the devil, staring out from the parchment like a declaration. A medieval legend grew around that image, and it is as dark as it is dramatic. According to the story, a monk in Bohemia committed a terrible offense and was sentenced to be walled up alive. Desperate to escape, he promised to create, in a single night, a book that would contain all human knowledge and bring glory to his monastery. As the hours vanished, the task proved impossible. So the monk, in despair, prayed not to God but to Lucifer, offering his soul in exchange for help. By morning, the codex was complete, flawless, and the devil's portrait stood as the signature of the pact. It's a chilling tale, but scholarship offers a different kind of awe. Modern analysis suggests the manuscript was likely written by one primary scribe. The handwriting remains remarkably uniform throughout, with consistent style and rhythm across the pages. That doesn't mean it was written in one night. It means one person may have devoted years, perhaps decades, to the task. Estimates vary, but even working steadily for hours each day, copying and illustrating a manuscript of this size could plausibly consume a significant portion of a lifetime. In that reality, the legend becomes less literal and more symbolic. A single human being, laboring so intensely on a work so immense, can feel almost inhuman. When people couldn't easily imagine the discipline required, they reached for a supernatural explanation. And that may be the most revealing detail of all. Not whether the devil wrote the book, but why so many people felt they needed that story in order to make sense of what human hands had done. And that estimate doesn't even account for the illuminated initials and decorative flourishes, the careful ornament that turns copying into artistry and could easily add years, perhaps decades, of additional labor. Realistically, most historians see the Codex Gigas not as a one-night miracle, but as a sustained work of a single scribe over a long stretch of time, often proposed as 20 to 30 years in the early 1200s. In that light, the book becomes less a supernatural stunt and more a monument of endurance, a compilation designed to elevate a monastery's reputation, gathering scripture and reference texts into one colossal statement of piety, learning, and institutional pride. Yet even within that practical explanation, the manuscript's choices keep the air of unease alive. The full-page devil portrait is not a casual doodle. It is confronting, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Alongside it sit texts that brush against the boundaries of medieval fear and hope, exorcism formulas, remedies, chronicles, elements that make the Codex feel less like a simple Bible and more like a miniature universe, containing both the sacred and what threatens it. That mixture helped generate the old rumor that the book was cursed. Not cursed in the cinematic sense of instant death, but cursed in the slow, historical way superstition often works: misfortune, decline, loss. And the manuscript's journey through history seems to feed that story. The monastery associated with it fell on hard times and eventually parted with the book. It passed through powerful hands, including the court of Emperor Rudolf II in Prague, a ruler fascinated by alchemy, astrology, and the occult. Later, in the chaos of the 30 Years' War, it was carried off as war booty in 1648 and brought to Stockholm, where it ultimately settled into the National Library of Sweden. The Ark of its ownership, monks, emperors, armies, feels dramatic enough to invite legend even without any literal curse at work. Is there truth to Satan's involvement? Rationally, no. What we have is a blend of myth-making, marketing, and medieval storytelling, a way of explaining a feat that feels beyond ordinary human capacity. But it's easy to see why the legend took hold. The uniform handwriting across hundreds of pages is startling. The script does not visibly collapse into fatigue. The rhythm stays eerily steady. To many viewers, it reads like obsession made visible, as if the scribe was driven by a force that wouldn't let him stop. Some have even suggested, cautiously, that a compulsion such as hypergraphia could help explain the relentless consistency. Whether or not that's true, the question remains: why place the devil so prominently inside a work anchored in Scripture? Some argue it was meant as warning, a visual counterpoint to salvation. Others suggest it reflects a broader medieval habit of representing the entire moral cosmos, heaven and hell, order and threat, in one frame. Either way, it ensured the book would never feel merely devotional. It would feel dangerous. Modern study strips away the supernatural without stripping away the wonder. Under scientific scrutiny, the Codex yields ordinary materials: iron gall ink, pigments consistent with its era, parchment likely made from calfskin or other animal hides. No hidden messages bloom under ultraviolet light. No secret cipher emerges. No exotic substance explains the feat. Even the oft-repeated detail that required the skins of 160 animals is more evocative than certain. The manuscript keeps its practical secrets close. We do not know the scribe's name, and any identifying note, sometimes read as a line about an enclosed or solitary monk, remains ambiguous enough to deepen the mood rather than resolve it. So the Devil's Bible continues to straddle fact and legend. It is absolutely real. You can stand before it and see the ink, the weight, the scale, the face staring from a vellum. The legend persists because it compresses a human reaction into a single dramatic explanation. This feels impossible. Therefore, something beyond human must have done it. In our time, we replace demons with discipline, and yet the sense of impossibility remains. Perhaps that is the lasting power of the Codex Gigas. It turns human persistence into something so extreme it begins to resemble myth. From ink and parchment, our trail of mystery shifts back into earth and stone, into rumors that travel farther than proof. Deep in China, stories circulate a pyramid so huge it would dwarf Egypt's greatest, a white monument supposedly hidden among mountains and kept out of sight. The tale entered Western imagination in the 1940s, when wartime pilots reported seeing a vast, pale pyramid glinting from above, its cap seeming almost metallic in the sun. Newspaper accounts followed, and the legend hardened into a single image: a white pyramid rising like a forbidden wonder, too large to be believed and too remote to be verified. The reality, as it usually is both less sensational and still genuinely remarkable. Around Xi'an, archaeologists have long known of numerous pyramidal burial mounds, imperial and noble tombs from dynasties such as the Western Han and beyond. These are not stone pyramids like Giza, but massive earthen structures, sometimes faced with packed clay, now softened by centuries and often covered in vegetation or crops. One of the largest, the mausoleum of Emperor Wu Maoling, is enormous by any standard, broad, flat-topped, and dominating its plain, yet nowhere near the 1,000-foot titan described in legend. Later analysis suggests that famous White Pyramid photos often point to Maoling or similar mounds, their pale appearance possibly exaggerated by seasonal conditions, bright soil, or glare from altitude, while their scale was likely misjudged from the air. Other tombs feed the story as well. The burial complex of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor associated with the Terracotta Army, forms a substantial mound and is surrounded by traditions of extraordinary contents, most famously rivers of mercury described in ancient texts. It is not secret in the sense of being unknown, but it has been treated with caution, and that caution has helped keep the aura of mystery alive. For much of the 20th century, access to many imperial burial landscapes was restricted, and large mounds were sometimes planted over or allowed to blend into surrounding farmland, which to outsiders would feel like deliberate concealment even when the reasons were practical, cultural, and preservation-minded. Why the restraint? Because excavation is a kind of destruction. Once a sealed tomb is open, murals can fade, textiles can disintegrate, organic offerings can vanish into air and light. China's approach has often been to wait until conservation methods can protect what exposure would otherwise ruin. That policy is intensified by the scale of imperial tombs, which are not single chambers but entire subterranean worlds, complex enough to overwhelm hurried investigation. So the White Pyramid remains an entanglement of truth and exaggeration. The pyramids of China are real, numerous, and historically documented, even if they don't match the gleaming Atlantean monument of rumor. And yet the dream persists that somewhere among the Qinling foothills there may be an unusually large mound, still unexcavated, still holding its interior intact. An authentic wonder not because it rewrites global history, but because it preserves an ancient world beneath living soil. Until systematic excavation becomes possible, the legend will continue to hover in the gap between what can be confirmed and what people want to believe. And sometimes the strangest discoveries aren't built upward at all. Sometimes they are carved downward, hidden not behind secrecy, but beneath water, forgotten in plain sight. In 1992, in Longview County, a villager decided to drain a local pond rumored to be bottomless. As the water receded, the ground did not reveal mud and stones. It revealed emptiness, an immense man-made chamber carved into solid rock, its walls stretching into darkness. Curiosity spread. More ponds were drained, and one by one, more caverns emerged until the count reached 24 vast underground halls, all cut from sandstone with unmistakable human intent. These are the Longview Caves, and their scale is what makes them so unsettling. Some chambers rise around 30 meters high, with broad floors and massive pillars left standing to support the ceilings. Across the complex, the excavated volume is staggering, so large that the amount of removed stone is often estimated in the hundreds of thousands to nearly 1 million cubic meters. Even allowing for rough calculations, it implies years or decades of sustained labor on an industrial level. Yet no clear historical record describes their construction. No local chronicle boasts of the project. No inscription names a patron. The caves exist as if they were created and then deliberately erased from memory. Inside, the surfaces are not rough. They are finished, covered in consistent, parallel chisel marks that run across walls, ceilings, and pillars like a textured signature. In places, there are simple carvings or symbols, but nothing that decisively identifies who built them or why. The uniformity of the tool marks suggests coordination, shared method, perhaps even an aesthetic choice. Not just excavation, but design. Walking within them feels less like entering a mine and more like stepping into an underground cathedral, where stone has been shaped into space with a confidence that expects the work to be seen. So the questions arrive naturally. Why carve such enormous chambers and leave them unmentioned? Where did the removed stone go? What purpose justified the effort? Storage, refuge, quarrying, ritual, something practical we no longer recognize. And perhaps most unnerving, how did these halls remain structurally stable for so long, sealed beneath ponds, waiting for a single decision to drain the water and expose a hidden architecture that history never thought to record? Researchers have tried to narrow down when and why the caves were made. Pottery fragments found in the sediment have often been dated broadly to the Han period, roughly around 200 BCE to 100 CE, which would make the caves more than 2,000 years old. If that timeline holds, the builders would have been contemporaries of early imperial China, an era otherwise well documented for its public works. Yet local lore described the ponds as bottomless for generations, implying that by the time anyone remembered these waters, the chambers beneath had already slipped out of living knowledge. Once abandoned, it is easy to imagine nature doing what always does, filling emptiness with water, silting over entrances, turning architecture into rumor. Then comes a question of purpose, and here the theories multiply because none of them fully fits. One practical idea is quarrying. Perhaps the caves were excavated to extract sandstone for nearby construction. But if this were simply mining, why shape the walls into sweeping halls with uniform chisel patterns, leaving massive pillars standing like deliberate architectural choices? Most quarries leave jagged scars and irregular voids, not finished surfaces that look designed to be seen. Another proposal is storage, grain, supplies, or valuables. Yet the scale feels excessive, and the lack of interconnecting tunnels is strange for a coordinated storage complex. Each chamber is largely isolated, which suggests either separate projects carried out under the same tradition or a deliberate decision to keep spaces independent. Refuge is another possibility, underground shelter during periods of unrest. But again, the size seems larger than necessary if concealment was the goal, and the absence of domestic traces, no obvious hearths, no long-term habitation debris, weakens that interpretation. More speculative ideas drift toward ritual or ceremonial use, imagining subterranean temples or sanctuaries shaped for awe. People sometimes point to acoustics. Shout inside one of these chambers, and the echo can feel almost theatrical, as if the space was meant to amplify sound. It is an intriguing thought, but remains conjecture without altars, iconography, or clear ritual deposits. Others propose a hydraulic function, reservoirs, water management, irrigation-related infrastructure. Yet the meticulous finishing and a lack of consistent connectivity between caves complicate a purely utilitarian water storage model, and the chamber's layouts do not read like a single engineered water system. One of the most confounding details is what is missing. No tools, no broken chisels, no lamp fragments, no piles of debris, no worker signature left behind. For an undertaking that may have required removing close to 1 million cubic meters of rock, the cleanliness is almost as strange as the carving itself. Either the builders were extraordinarily thorough in clearing everything out, or the caves were maintained and managed for long enough that waste was systematically removed, or later processes buried evidence in ways we do not yet understand. And then there is the question of the extracted stone, a volume that large does not simply disappear. If hauled away, it could have supplied massive building projects, walls, terraces, foundations, yet no obvious nearby structure is confidently tied to such a supply. Could have been moved gradually, used over decades across multiple sites, or floated away via waterways. Possibly, could have become part of construction that later eroded, was dismantled, or lies undiscovered. Also possible, the stone's absence is not proof of mystery on its own, but it keeps the riddle open. Some surveys and studies have confirmed the obvious. The caves were hand-carved, their surfaces marked by tools harder than sandstone. That points toward Iron Era technology, which aligns with the Han Era date, yet still leaves the silence of the historical record unresolved. The stability of the chambers, the placement of pillars, the way ceilings were left supported, suggests practical knowledge of rock behavior and load distribution, not necessarily advanced in a modern sense, but clearly experienced, as if the builders understood what the stone would tolerate and shaped it accordingly. Standing inside one of these caverns, the effect is hard to dismiss. The parallel pick marks create a strange uniformity, like a deliberate texture rather than accidental scarring. The pillars feel architectural, not leftover. The scale is disproportionate to any single simple explanation. The imagination rushes in workshop, sanctuary, hidden storehouse, underground palace. Yet the caves refuse to confirm any story. They are quiet, almost aggressively so. No inscriptions, no dedicatory plaque, no clear narrative debris, just space, geometry, and tool marks. For now, The Longyu Caves remain a monument to effort without explanation. They remind us that history is not only what was written down. Whole projects can exist outside official memory, built locally, managed quietly, abandoned, and swallowed by landscape until a chance act of curiosity brings them back. In a way, their silence is part of their power. We can measure the stone removed and map the chambers with lasers, but we still can't answer the simplest human question. What were they for? From underground riddles, we move to a different kind of disappearance, one not of architecture, but of a recognizable pattern in the archaeological record. In North America near the end of the Ice Age, a distinctive tool tradition spread across enormous distances, and then seemed to stop. The Clovis culture is known through stone, beautifully crafted fluted spear points found from the Great Plains to far beyond. Radiocarbon dating generally places Clovis between roughly 13,200 and 12,800 years ago, and then the signature points fade from the record. It is not that humans vanish. People clearly continue, but the recognizable Clovis pattern does. The question is why. One explanation is adaptation rather than extinction. Around the same time, climate shifted dramatically at the onset of the Younger Dryas, a sudden cooling episode that disrupted ecosystems, altered water sources, and coincided with the decline and extinction of many large mammals, mammoths, mastodons, giant bison. If Clovis groups relied heavily on big game hunting, the loss or movement of these animals would have pressured them to change strategies. New prey, new environments, new technologies. In this view, Clovis did not die. It evolved. The people remained, but their toolkits diversified into regionally distinct traditions, Folsom points and other styles, better suited to new realities. Another possibility is that Clovis was never a single people at all. It may have been a widely shared technological approach used by different groups who exchanged ideas, intermarried, or simply converged on a similar solution. If so, the disappearance of Clovis points might reflect cultural drift. Networks changed, preferences shifted, materials differ by region, and the once shared style fractured into local forms. That would look like a sudden end in the archaeological record, even if the transition was gradual in lived experience. Then there is a more dramatic hypothesis. Catastrophe. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis proposes that a comet or fragments of one exploded or struck parts of the continent around 12,800 years ago, triggering wildfires, atmospheric dust, cooling, and ecological collapse. Proponents point to evidence reported at some sites: microspherules, nanodiamonds, unusual carbon-rich layers, sometimes associated with a black mat. Critics counter that such materials can form through multiple processes, that results have not been consistently replicated everywhere, and that no definitive crater of the right age has been confirmed. Even if an impact occurred, it remains debated whether it could be tied directly to changes in human technology and culture. Other factors could have played roles: competition between groups, change in migration routes, resource conflict, disease, or demographic shifts as landscapes transformed. And importantly, more and more evidence suggests the Americas were people before Clovis, meaning Clovis was not the first, but one tradition among several. That complicates the story further. The vanishing may be less about a people being erased and more about a particular style losing its dominance as broader cultural diversity increased. The fascination persists because the timing sits at a threshold when the Pleistocene world was ending. Climate lurched, megafauna declined, landscapes rearranged, and human societies adjusted. Somewhere in that storm of change, the last classic Clovis point was made and used, and the archaeological signature shifted. The record makes it feel sudden, like a switch flipping. Yet lived history may have been a patchwork of experiments, failures, and innovations. It's a reminder that archaeology often tracks what preserves best, not what mattered most. A tool style can disappear quickly without the people disappearing at all, just as technology in our own time can vanish from everyday use while society continues uninterrupted. The Clovis mystery may be a case of collapse, or it may be a case of transformation. Either way, it points to a deeper truth. Even highly successful ways of life can end when the world changes faster than tradition can hold.